Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast, where I seek truth in the world's best books. I'm your host, Eric Rostad, coming to you from the beautiful Books of Titans studio in Franklin, Tennessee. My goal is to read 52 books per year and share what I'm learning. I'll talk a bit about each book, tie ideas together from a variety of genres, and share the one thing I always hope to remember from each book. Today I'm going to cover The Dawn by Yoram Hazony, Political Teachings of the Book of Esther. This was my final book for 2022, so it was book 52 of 52. This one was a late addition to my reading list from last year, and it came about because of a tweet. So I had read somewhere along the way in 2022 that the Book of Esther was fantasy or fanciful. And so I wrote a tweet, something to that effect, where, I found out today that the Book of Esther, it couldn't have happened, or it couldn't happen this way, or something like that. And someone saw that and sent me this book as a response. And I think the main thing is if you view something as fanciful, or it's easy to dismiss it. And what this book does is really give weight to the Book of Esther. Not that it needs it, but kind of shows what's going on at a much deeper level. And so each chapter starts out with actual chapter of the Book of Esther, and then the author here just kind of digs in deep as to what this means. And if you are unfamiliar with the Book of Esther, it's a really interesting story. It's rather short, and so you'd probably just be best off stopping this episode and just going to the Book of Esther. You can read through it 30, 45 minutes and then come back and you'll have a better idea of what's going on. But the gist of it is that it is a story of Jews who are in exile. So they're in Persia at this time. And the question is kind of this: how then shall we live? In the sense of this is a book about power and political power, and by definition, the Jews who are in exile in Persia, they do not have any power. They are powerless. And so if you are in that situation, as the Jews were here, what do you do? If there's a king over you and that king is not good, what do you do? Where's the line? Where do you draw the line? What do you do in these situations? And how should you act? And what constitutes taking action as opposed to just going along with what's going on? And so it's a really interesting look at the Book of Esther, but then it's a kind of a broader view of the Bible as well. So you're digging deep into this book, but by doing so, you're looking at a number of different stories in the Bible. And so how do they relate to this? How do they relate to power and political power and all that? So I loved it. This was such a good book. It was the last book of the year. I've had a few like that where the last book of the year really surprises me, and it was a lot of fun. There was one part that just nailed me. I'll read that a little later on about anger. A lot of discussion about means versus ends, something I'm very fascinated with, especially after reading the Robert Caro series about Lyndon B. Johnson. I'm interested any time a book is talking about means versus ends and kind of digging into that question. Is it okay to dismiss the means to get to a specific ends, or is that not okay? And those types of questions. So I'll go into that in the next segment of this episode, and then in segment 3, I'll cover the one thing, my one key takeaway. But before I jump into the next segment, I just want to share the reading stats. This is a 263-page book. I finished it in 8 hours and 36 minutes. That was over a 6-day period, and so I averaged 44 pages per day. That was between December 18 and 23 of 2022. So next up, segment 2, 3 ideas that were interesting to me in The Dawn. Well, if you think this is a book that you'd be interested in, it's kind of hard to find. I mean, not super hard, but they do have it on Amazon. You may have to get like a used copy of it. I also found it on Abe Books, but just in terms of getting it everywhere, it's not one of those books you can just get anywhere. So if you are interested, you may need to kind of hunt around for it a little bit. But there are a few copies available as of right now on Amazon. So a few ideas here that I want to share that came up in this book, and the first is just something I've been thinking about lately. So right now, 2023, it's January 26th when I'm recording this, and I'm reading through the Bible right now. So I'm gonna from here on out, I'm going to start each year just reading through the Bible. And I know it's going to take about 2 months. So I just figure every January and February going forward, I'm just starting at the beginning of the Bible and reading to the very end. And so I'm in the midst of that right now. And so I'm just very interested in approaches to the Bible, how to pick things out, how to read the Bible, and just how to get the most out of it. And so this book helped with that. The Dawn, the book I'm talking about here, it really helped with that. And here's a few ways in which it did. So I heard, it's kind of a weird thing to say, but I heard it said that the Bible is a magic book, and what is meant by that is that there are words on the page that are in front of you, and you can read them, and you can get a lot out of just reading that. But that's like a very small part of what's going on. And this is not the case with most, if any other books. Like you can read a book and everything's just kind of right there in front of you. But when you're reading the Bible, there'll be these weird turns of phrases. You're like, why would it be said that way? And if you dig into that, it's referring to something else. Or if they'll be talking about a person and then they'll describe a characteristic about that person that sounds familiar. And it should sound familiar because someone else has been described as that in the Bible. And so if you're reading something about this one character and it says this thing that reminds you of someone else, well, that should force you to think about that other person, and then that should kind of help you think about this person as being a mix of these, or you can kind of gather more information just from the things it's referencing. And so there's the part in front of you that you're reading, but there's so much going on. And what the Dawn does is really show you, just for one book of the Bible, what that would look like, what it looks like to read it, and just to see all of these connections to, for instance, in the story of Esther, connecting Mordecai with Joseph, connecting Mordecai with other people in the Bible, with Moses. Like, what are the differences? What are the similarities? What did Moses do with power? What did Joseph do with power? What did Mordecai do with power? What did Esther do with power? What did they do with lack of power? And just kind of like piecing all these things together. It really becomes a puzzle. Just this puzzle of like putting these pieces together, and to dig in deep like this into one book is really fun. So you can read this book to get some ideas just on how to approach reading the Bible. So things that may seem silly when you read the Bible, or things that may be difficult to understand, there's probably a reason that it's there. It's probably a reason that it's written in a particular way. Just think that a lot of this stuff would have been oral, so you're before it was written down. So you're not going to waste words. So there's not wasted words here. Like everything has a point, and there's just a lot of connection points throughout other parts of the Bible that help you interpret what you're reading here. So that's just the first thing that stuck out, is just, if for no other reason, just read this book as a way to become a better reader overall, learn how to kind of dig into things, but specifically to become a better reader of the Bible, and super specifically to become a better reader of the Book of Esther. So that's the first thing. As I mentioned in segment 1, there are a lot of discussion about means versus ends in this book. So I want to just highlight some of these that come up. As I said before, I'm just very interested in this. So one question that comes at the beginning, this is on page 39. If this is what Esther and Mordecai must do in order to succeed, would it not be better to refuse, to abstain, to die, rather than play according to the rules dictated by impure men? So that's that end quote. So that's kind of the question. Do you just go out and blaze of glory if you are in exile and there is someone in power over you and they are evil, or they are not doing things how you would want them to do? What do you do? Do you either give up? Do you fight? Do you help them? What do you do? And so that's kind of the big question at the beginning here. And it ties into that means verse ends. In another part on that page, it says, In choosing against resistance and submission and in favor of active support of the despot, both Esther and Mordecai open themselves to the charge that they have been blinded by their concern with ends, that they have corrupted themselves, prostituted themselves, that all this truck with tyrant constitutes a willful collaboration with evil, and that no good man should be involved in such endeavors, much less a good Jew. End quote. So that kind of sets up the question of how then shall they live within this area of exile. Next up, page 92. If this is true, then the power to bring redemption can come only through rejecting Joseph's road, as Mordecai does, and traversing the road of Moses and Abraham, the road of disobedience and war. Before that, the Jew can and must compromise, obey, and bend to gain power for good, but in the end, salvation can never come from gaining power, only by expending the power that has been gained to alter the course of events. So the distinguishing between gaining power, obtaining power for the sake of power, or for obtaining power to expend to do good. So again, that question, I mean, is it okay to have corrupt means then to get to a good if you're going to use that good to help others? Or, what's the motivation to get the power in the first place? Is it to just have the power, or is it to help others do good? But still, you still have to be concerned with the means as part of that. And then the final part, page 130 here. In other words, if saving life is the highest value and all accumulation of power is understood to be saving life, does not God then condone any and every action taken in the service of building up political and economic power? In this case, the political and economic power of the Egyptian house of bondage? End quote. And again, it's just this book goes back a lot to Joseph when he's in Egypt and how he uses power. But that question of is if saving life is the highest good, then shouldn't everything be about getting power to save that life? But just that fascinating question of is that even possible? If you use bad means to get to what you think is a good end, does that corrupt the whole thing? Does that mess up the whole thing? So I loved a lot of the discussion in terms of power on that side and just the means versus ends question here. The last thing I want to highlight is a section on anger that I resonated with it, and I thought it was just very insightful, and so I wanted to read it. It's kind of long here, but I'll just go here. But why does the king leave the room? What does such behavior really mean? Storming out if insulted or embarrassed, slamming a door behind, or similarly not speaking with someone for years, abandoning a flagging marriage without a word, resigning from high office, and in the extreme suicide, all these are familiar and they are the same. Hardly ever does it make sense to act this way, strictly calculating benefits against cost. But these are not the actions of reason and interest. They are the actions of the spirit, which, finding no possible recourse for the reestablishment of control, establishes mastery at the expense of self-interest, through the demolition of the situation itself. In departure, that which cannot be controlled is nonetheless brought to bow to one's will. Even in suicide, the action of the spirit is the same. Its need to control winning over the needs of the body, control being firmly and finally regained in the destruction of all that has heretofore resisted control. Such an action is therefore not only one of self-destruction, but also of powerlessness, since it proves that control cannot have been imposed in any other way. End quote. He's talking about the king of Persia here in the Book of Esther, and the impulsiveness of the man and that sort of thing. And he's so angry at one point, he just leaves the room and then just goes into this paragraph about that. But how that kind of anger, that kind of behavior is part and parcel to suicide. Like suicide is the extreme, but storming out or slamming a door or these kind of things, that it's along the line of continuum, but it's dealing with control. It's dealing with a sense of powerlessness, and the reaction to that is this anger, is this trying to regain control, but through a way that is self-destructive. And there's just so much insight. I mean, just, viewing myself and how I respond to things, viewing how others respond to things, and perhaps seeing it not as someone just being crazy or that kind of thing, but it's calculated, and it's a reaction to losing some sort of power. And so, yes, this book deals with power. It deals with how to react to power when you don't have it, what to do with it when you do have it, and how to view it in others. And this is going to tie in very well with my one thing that I'll cover in segment 3. This book exposed a thought that I have going through this world. And it's brought about, I didn't even realize that it's so strongly inside of me. And the idea is that of, well, it's one that Adam Smith talks about in The Wealth of Nations, in that man is driven by self-interest. And that's different than selfishness in the sense that self-interest, the baker's baking bread and selling that bread so he can feed his family. The brewer is doing the same. So there's a self-interest there. It doesn't necessarily mean that, everybody's greedy and selfish and all that, but self-interest is what drives people. And I just kind of take that for granted and don't consider it in the sense of, everyone's self-interested. They're looking out for themselves. That's what keeps the world moving, and that's what keeps the economy going, and all that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of an idea, and it's shelved to the side because that's just how things work. And I don't even really think about it anymore. But this book just described another motivation for, or another guiding principle for human motivation. And that is the appetite for rule, the appetite for power. And I want to read a section here because it really made me think, and it really had me take a step back and kind of rethink, is the desire, is self-interest a guiding principle for human motivation, or is this desire to rule, this desire for power? So let me read a few parts here. The king appears in Esther as a representation of something else, something we are unaccustomed to recognizing in ourselves and others: the appetite for rule. The essential ingredient in the character of every ruler, in this case unenlightened, unchanneled, and unrestrained. It is worth considering the appetite for rule and control more closely, the better to understand this king and all others. The desire for rule, which the philosophers call thymos, and the Jews knew as spirit, is a primary aspect of man's nature, the first quality mentioned in the books of Moses with respect to mankind. God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and they will rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the skies, and over the cattle, and over the earth." Every person at all times strives to rule and control that which comprises his world. Skipping ahead, such world is a fantasy, but it is one for which man strives from the day he is born, as surely as he strives for physical sustenance. As the appetite for food drives him towards his supper, so too does the appetite for control drive man to rule his world, or if he cannot, to find someone who can rule it in his place and provide him with the stability for which he yearns. End quote. That captures so much of recent politics. It captures so much when you're reading about power, and it made me take a step back and think, what is the guiding principle of human motivation? Is it self-interest? Is it just living for yourself and trying to get as much as possible, and in doing so, that kind of helping make the economy go, the invisible hand, all that? Or is this desire for power, is that the guiding principle of human motivation? Is it the guiding principle that we don't like to talk about? Maybe we don't like to see it in ourselves. It's really easy to point out in others. This person is power hungry. This person is ambitious. This person is egotistical, narcissistic. We can point it all out in other people, but is that the real guiding principle? it made me think. And I love when books do that. I love when you have this closely held idea that you don't even know is closely held. It permeates your thoughts. It permeates how you think of how the world works. And here comes another idea and just helps you, think through it more. So I loved that. That's my one key takeaway from the Dawn. To recap, this is a deep dive into the Book of Esther. Probably not as deep as you could go, but it's a deep dive, but along a particular topic, and that is the topic of power and politics. And what do you do if you are not in power? And what's great about the Book of Esther is we're looking at Esther and we're looking at Mordecai, and they are people at the beginning. They are Jews and they are living in exile. So by definition, they have no power. Yet within this story, they come to high amounts of power within this small narrative, within this small story. And so you see different ways of handling power. Not having it, what do you do? Having it, what do you do? What do you do when you see it in others? What do you do when people are abusing power? What does it mean to abuse power? You've got a king here who appears by everything we see that to be abusing power, and yet Mordecai and Esther don't do anything against that king. But when that king appoints someone with power and then gets rid of all other voices in the kingdom, and this person almost has absolute power, that's when Mordecai says no. So why was that the line? Why was that the line that caused Mordecai to take action? Whereas this king, not a Jew, not in line with how Mordecai would want to live, why was that okay? Why was it not when he appointed this kind of absolute ruler? Interesting questions, fascinating way to just help you read this story, to read the Bible in general on how to tie pieces together, how to tie stories, people, areas, and all these different things together. So I highly recommend this one. I mean, it relatively short book, 8 hours to read. And then if you read the Book of Esther, another 30 minutes, but a lot of lessons, a lot of neat things to think about. So I would suggest reading this one. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at eric@booksoftitans.com. If you have read this book, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear maybe some things that you got out of it. I took I write very small, and I just have a ton of notes in the back of this book. They cover two pages. So I wrote a lot down. I underlined a lot. I got a lot out of this book. I would love to hear from you, though, if you have read it, and I would love to hear what you got out of it. You can follow Books of Titans on Instagram or Twitter, and the website is stock full of resources to help you find the best books and to create your own reading list. I'll be back in 2 weeks to discuss another book or something related to this year, my 2023 reading list. Until then, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.